Hey everyone, so this morning I'm going to be making an American Pale Ale using RO water and my Brewzilla 65 litre. Now when I went into all grain brewing a few years ago, I bought one of these not long after and I felt a little bit lost, a little bit overwhelmed, didn't really know where to start, and I was looking online, couldn't really find a good basic how-to video. So hopefully today I can help some people that are ready to start off in their home brewing experience, or perhaps been using one of these for only a short while and still looking for some tips and tricks. So the first thing I've done this morning, I've got out all of my gear and I've gone and rinsed everything with dechlorinated water using my carbon filter. Okay, so everything is clean and ready to go. Now there are three things I got ready before I started today. First one, I went to the local brew shop to get my grain bill. So I had some base malt here, which I took down to Brewmart. They supplied my specialty malts and milled all my grain for me. Anyone starting off, you can normally just take your grain bill down to the local brew shop and they will get it all ready and mill it all for you. The other thing I did is over the last 3 evenings I've been collecting RO water into these. So that's all ready to go, and then I needed to weigh out my salts. So that's all my preparation. We're ready to get started here today. Make sure your false bottom is in nice and securely. Mine has become a little bit warped over the years, so I like to just give it a little bit of a bend. Twist it a little bit in the bottom and just make sure that's as tight a fit as you can get. I'm now going to add 42 litres of mash water and get that heating up. first things you need to do when you buy one of these is have a 15 amp socket installed. So I had an electrician come straight round. I chose a spot where I was going to do my brewing, and I've had an outdoor 15 amp socket installed on the wall there. So that's one of the important things that you need before you can do anything with this machine. So I've got 42 litres in here now. I'm going to turn it on and get the water heating up. I'm going to start on manual, and I'm going to set the temp for 69 degrees. I'm going to mash today at 67, and when I put the grain in, it will bring that down by a couple of degrees. Press play, turn all three elements on. Put the lid on and leave that water to heat up to 69 degrees where I want it. It's going to take a little while. Time to go get a coffee and get some other stuff ready. This water's been heating up for a few minutes now, so I'm going to come in a moment and add my salts and acid. But first I'll show you my preparation steps in terms of getting all the water and all the salts ready. So there are two main filters in home brewing, much as there is in commercial brewing as well. Carbon filters and RO filters. So this is where I started. This is a simple inline carbon filter that you can plug straight onto the end of a hose, and it will remove all chlorine and any sediment out of the water. Now these can produce really good beer. I won my first couple of awards, a gold in the state amateur competition for American Pale Ale and a bronze in the national for beer brewed with these. So they can make really nice beer, very cheap, around about $10 from eBay. I still use these today to wash out all of my brew gear. When I get the Brewzilla, the malt pipe, everything out for brew day, I will rinse it with this, and it's dechlorinated water that I'm going to use for the brew. About 2.5 years ago, I moved to an RO filter. So these just allow you to dial your water profile in to the type of beer that you're going to make. And although a lot of beers were really good coming out with these, it just gives you that extra few percent, particularly things like NEPAs, where you can run a higher chloride to sulfide ratio and really put the emphasis back on the malts and give you that soft, pillowy mouthfeel you're looking for. And also you see a little bit of a difference with very clean styles like Pilsners and Kolsch and that type of thing. So this RO filter, it's pretty cheap model, 90 to 100 Australian dollars off eBay. Does produce a fair bit of waste. It's got a wastewater line, and very important that you run that down a drain. It's very concentrated in salts. You don't want to run that into your garden. These are quite fine, very basic model, but they do the job, and they've done me well for a few years now. I collect water into a cube here. This particular model takes around about 3 hours to fill a 20 litre cube. So when I'm brewing on the weekend, 3 evenings before, I'll put on my first cube, one the following weekend, etc. The other important thing with these is make sure you use a food grade hose. So you don't want to use a normal garden hose if you're running your filter outside and get that sort of plasticky hose taste. So make sure everything's clean and giving you nice pure water to start with. The next thing after collecting my RO water is to build up my salt profile and go and weigh up my salts. Now that I've got some RO water, I've got water that has stripped out all of the salts and allows me to build them back up to suit the profile of the beer that I'm making. In this instance, American Pale Ale. So I'm using a salt profile that I've made myself through experimenting a little bit, but I do use Brewfather, and you can quite simply choose the American Pale Ale water profile in there. You put in how much mash and sparge water you're going to use, and it will tell you how much salts you need to use. So I have calcium chloride, NaCl, normal salt, Epsom salts and gypsum here. I have some small scales. I find it easy to use a little measuring tub like this on top and a little spoon, and I'll go around each of these and weigh them out. So I like to have these salts weighed out prior to brew day, So I can get up in the morning, get on with everything. As soon as they're ready to go, I can tip them in and get on with it. So I use 2 containers. Here is my mash salts, all weighed out and ready to go in 1 container. And then the second container here, these are the salts I'm going to use for the sparge water. So they're ready to go, and it's almost time to brew. This water's only part way through heating up, but I'm going to get my salts and my acid in here ready, so they've got plenty of time to dissolve and go right through that water before I need to mash in. So one of the big advantages also of using RO water is you can use an app like Brewzilla, and it will know, depending on what grains and what salts you're adding in there, exactly where your pH is going to be. So to get your mash pH somewhere between 5.2 and 5.4 is really important. So I've punched all of those figures into Brewzilla. I've got my salts weighed out and ready to go. It's told me to add 5 ml of 88% lactic acid, and that's going to give me a mash pH of 5.3, exactly where I want it. So I'm going to get all that ready now. My pre-weighed salts makes it very easy and quick. Get those in. I'll give the tub a quick rinse. Make sure I get all those salts in that I'm expecting. This is my lactic acid. I'm going to use a 1 ml syringe to measure out 5 ml. Okay, I'll give that a good stir. Some of the salts are a little bit harder to dissolve, so I do like to get them in as early as I can in this water. Stir it a couple of times and try and make sure they're fully dissolved before you go and put your grain in. Close that back up and wait for that to come up to temperature. This water is at 69 degrees now, so I'm ready to mash in. First thing I do is pause the unit and turn all 3 elements off. Okay, so take the lid off. I'm going to give it another quick stir. Make sure everything's dissolved, that it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to get my mash pipe ready. Now this is the screen for the bottom of my mash pipe. This standard unit comes with a screen with the hole and the overflow tube in the middle, and I found that was really not necessary. So I bought this as an additional add-on. That's the new false bottom for the mash pipe without the hole in the middle. I find it much easier to mash with, and yeah, it just makes it life easier really. It was something that I didn't really need. So get this at the bottom. Push that down nice and tight. I don't want any grain coming through there. And we can put that in, ready to go. So I'm using 9 kilograms of grain here. I'm looking for about 43 litres to go into the fermenter, with a final B around about 5%. So this is base malt of Barrett Burston Pale Malt. There's just under 5% of medium crystal and about 3% of wheat malt. So for those interested, I'll put the full recipe in the comments of the video. I normally pour this in about 3 stages. You want to give it a gentle stir each time you pour some in, and just make sure you don't have any dough balls in there. Make sure all your grain is nice and loose, and the water can get right around it and extract all the sugars that it needs to. Okay, that's the last of the grain going in. Stir all of this through, make sure all the grain's down within the water and there's no big lumps in there. Just a little bit on the top here. Needs a good mixing through with the water. Okay, that's all nice and evenly spread now. I'm going to add my hose on here. You'll see that I'm using an extended hose. When I finish the brewing here today, I need to wheel this trolley with the Brewzilla around to the other side where my fermentation fridge is, and I'm going to pump that up into a Brewzilla. So I leave that extended pipe on. It's a little bit difficult to get on and off. That's fine anyway for while I'm mashing. I use something like a peg, nice and easy, just peg that onto the side. Turn my pump on. And I'm just going to turn that pump down with the blue dial here. Just to start with, probably only run it at about 1/3 of the speed. I don't want it running too fast. Otherwise the water will rise and it will start overflowing. There is some debate about whether you stir during the mash. Most of the experienced brewers prefer not to. You really want your grain bed to settle and act as a little bit of a filter. Sometimes I'll watch it 15-20 minutes in. I might find I just want to give it a gentle stir if it's looking like it is sticking. But definitely after that I'll leave it for the rest of the mash. And make sure that that grain bed can filter all of that unwanted grain material out. One mistake I did find when I did start brewing is I used to stir a fair bit during the mash, and particularly quite vigorously. Now if you stir vigorously at this stage, you can get a thing called hot side aeration, HSA, and there's a variety of different compounds in there that can become oxidized from putting too much oxygen in, stirring too vigorously at this stage. I think the most common one is the lipids, which can leave a little bit of a cardboard taste through your beer. And I was getting that at some stage, and I really found if you do need to give it a little bit of a stir, just do it quite gently and try not to put too much oxygen through it. But pretty much the less stirring the better, and that's going to give you better clarity through your beer as well. So that's running quite gently now. I'm going to mash at 67 degrees for 60 minutes. So I'm going to turn this back on, and I'm going to go now to auto. I'm going to turn it on, and the recommendation is that you only run the 500 and 1000 elements during the mash while you've got your mash tun and your grain in. They reckon you can get a little bit of scorching on the bottom of your vessel. I think that's probably a little bit overcautious, but I find you don't need the top element anyway. You've already got this at temperature. It just needs to hold at 67 degrees for 60 minutes. So that's that bang on 67 now. I'm just going to keep an eye on that, but I'm going to leave that to mash for 60 minutes and then I'm going to mash out. In the meantime, I'm going to get some sparge water ready. I'm using a 30 litre digiboil here today to heat my sparge water up. I find this is a really handy piece of equipment. When I started, I was just using a large saucepan on the barbecue and having to use a temperature probe to get my sparge water to the right temperature, but also then a little bit difficult to hold it at that temperature. So this is ideal. I've just added 17 litres of RO water in here. I've added my sparge salts and 0.27 ml of lactic acid. I'm going to just turn this on, turn the elements on, and I'm going to heat this water up to 74 degrees, and that's what I'm going to sparge at today. So this reached mash out temp of 74 degrees. The reasoning behind that is to stop the enzymes from converting starch to sugars within the grain. Some people believe mash out isn't really necessary, particularly since I'm going to sparge with water at 74 degrees anyway, but I find it only takes about 15 minutes, so it's just that extra little step to make sure I'm producing the best quality beer I can at the end. So I've paused the unit. I've got a pulley system here, which is ideal. If you can fit these ahead of where you're brewing somewhere, you can just take the little bit of weight off, lifting this malt pipe up with the water and the grain in. Isn't necessary. I've brewed at other people's houses and we pulled it up by hand, but it makes it a little bit easier if you can. I've lifted it up and turned the mash pipe so the feet are resting on these brackets here, and that's just gently draining out. I'm going to leave this for around about 5 minutes, let most of the water drain out before I start sparging. I'm going to now turn the unit up to 120 degrees and turn all 3 elements on and start bringing the temperature up, ready for the boil. So that's already done. I can turn those elements back on when your water gets up to probably about 1/3 to 1/2 full. Just make sure it's well above the elements on the bottom so you don't get any scorching. Right, that's turned up 120 degrees, going to give it a couple of minutes just to drain through and then I'll start sparging. So I'm just going to gently level off the top of this grain. It's a little bit of a hill or a lump on one side, so I definitely don't want to stir through it, just going to level the top slightly. And I had this screen at this stage, just put this on top of the grain, and as I pour the water on, it just creates a little bit of a shower effect and spreads it out a little bit more evenly through the grain bed. You sit that on there gently. I'm going to use a jug, go over to my digiboil and grab 2 litres at a time and gently pour through. pour in 2 litres at a time. Spread that around across that screen. Try to get it running down through all of the grain bed. Sometimes I move sides and make sure you cover all angles. Want to just give that grain as thorough a rinse as you can. So I'll get 2 litres. I'll leave that for probably about a minute just for most of that to go through. Grab another 2 litres and keep going until I've sparged all my volume through. All my sparge water has been through here now, and that's allowed a good sort of 5-10 minutes for the last of it to drain through, and it's pretty much all come through. So I'm going to take this mash tun off. I'm going to go dispose of this grain. And the temperature down the bottom is still on 120 degrees, so that's going to bring it up to a boil. So I'm going to put this lid on just to help it hold temperature and come up to the boil. It's really important at this stage you keep an eye on the temperature. This lid has to come off before it starts boiling, otherwise I'm going to get an overflow and it's going to pile out the sides and make a mess. So yeah, just got to keep an eye on that temperature. When it gets to perhaps 96 or above, I'm going to pretty much stay next to it, and as soon as I see some bubbling, some activity, I'm going to get this lid off. I'm going to need to boil without it on there. I've got a nice boil on here now, so I'm just going to reset my timer down the bottom by pressing pause, auto manual twice again, just to reset the timer and time a 1 hour boil. Turn it back on so my clock has started again. So the first of my hops are going to go in now. This is 25 grams of Warrior, which is my bittering hop. One thing I learned when I started brewing, it's important what hop you use for bittering. I used to use any old hop that was in the fridge at the time, but different hops will impart a different level of bitterness. For instance, you don't use something like Citra for bittering, it will leave a very harsh bitter taste. A lot of brewers love Magnum. Magnum's a very good bittering hop, leaves a very smooth bittering taste, but I prefer Warrior. Much the same, but I just prefer that taste a little bit. But Warrior or Magnum tend to be the best hops really for bittering. So that's going to sit in there now for 60 minutes. Important you have the lid off, not only to stop an overflow, but at this stage we are disinfecting everything, we're killing all the germs, but we're also boiling and steaming out all the DMS, which is an off compound that comes in from the grain. So we want a nice rolling boil, nice and open, and let it steam and get all of that rubbish and DMS out. So I'm going to leave this for around about half an hour, and then I'll put my immersion chiller in to sterilise it, and then I'll start putting some whirl flock, etc. in towards the last 15 minutes of the boil. It's been boiling now for about 58 minutes, so halfway through at about 30 minutes I've put my immersion chiller in there to make sure that's sterilised, and a couple of minutes ago I've just turned on my circulation pump to make sure that that's all sterilised all the way through there by the boiling work, but also to make sure the pump's not blocked. Sometimes little bits of grain will get down through your false bottom and block that up. 15 minutes to go I added a whirl flock tablet, and 10 minutes to go in the boil I added 5 grams of yeast nutrient as well. So I've got everything here ready for chilling. As soon as this hits 60 minutes I'm going to do a quick whirlpool, and I'm going to add 100 grams of Galaxy and 100 grams of Mosaic at flame out in a little bit of a whirlpool, but I want to start dropping the temperature as quickly as I can. For one, the longer it's above 70 degrees it will keep pulling bitterness out of the hops, but also it will start slowly adding DMS back into there if I take too long to chill it. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. With the immersion chiller, some of my friends will add fittings so the hose pipes can go straight on the end. I've just got clamps there, and I'm running an ice bath just over here. So in this I have ice cubes made out of ice cream containers, and they're just bringing that water down by 3 or 4 degrees maybe, making that slightly cooler, and I'm going to run that warm water out into the garden over here. So this is now ready to go. check my pump is running fine. That hot wort is circulating through that hose, making sure that's all sterilised. Very important, as soon as this temperature comes down from boiling, everything has to be highly sterile or you risk getting an infection in there. So I'm going to turn my elements off and pause the unit. So I'm using the circulation hose there run around the side to create a little bit of a spin in there, and I'm going to create a little bit more whirlpool here with my mash paddle. Okay, in with the flavouring hops. Keep giving that a bit of a stir, keep that whirlpool going for a couple of minutes. Now I've got a little aquarium filter sat in that esky with the ice water. So I'm just going to plug that in and that'll start running that cold water through this immersion chiller. The benefit of doing it this way, it doesn't use quite as much water as using the hose direct. It runs through a little bit slower, a little bit colder water. I've just got the hose over there also running into the ice bath. Just turn it on gently, try and run it roughly the same level as what it's running out over here. So I'll just keep an eye on it. I can turn it up slightly or down slightly if I need to, just to maintain that water level in the ice bath. So I'm just going to leave this top off just for a couple of minutes. I'm going to keep a very close eye on it, make sure I don't get any insects or anything near here, now while it's chilling. As soon as it gets down to probably about 80 degrees, I'm going to cover it up and make sure nothing can get in there, and then continue to chill it. Keep putting more ice into the ice bath. Get it down as quickly as I can. I'll probably get down to about 28, 30 degrees, and then I'll wheel this around and decant it into my fermenter. Okay everyone, just down to about 65 degrees now. So I've got my lid on there and a towel around there as well, just trying to close in all the gaps. Make sure no random fly or insects are going to come and get in there. Keep that really sealed up now that that's come down from boiling temperature. Just last then, this is going to take another 20 minutes or so to get down to where I want. Then I'm going to wheel it around there and pump it up into a Brewzilla. I can do a separate video on fermenting in a Brewzilla and some tips with that as well if people would find it useful. So this I'm going to pitch this in at 17 degrees. Bump it up, let it gradually rise to 18 where I'm going to do most of the fermentation, and then after about 6 days I'll bump it up slightly to about 19 degrees. It's going to have a big dry hop, 400 grams between Galaxy, Mosaic and Citra, which is a classic combo. So this beer should come out really good and I'm looking forward to trying it. So that's all for today everyone. It'd be great to see a few people subscribe to the channel. Send me any questions you have or any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching.